Should we start? So this time, as was mentioned by our Vice Chairman in his speech, that we have taken a departure from our recent trend of D Conclave. Earlier, we had this practice of not talking about the sector as such in the conclave. And the conclave used to be normally confined to socio-economic, health, spiritual aspects. But based on the feedback from our last conclave, we have one session on electricity, a futuristic view. And for this, we had four, but now we have three eminent personalities to talk about this. The reason is like the electricity landscape. It's a prime example of the fourth industrial revolution, as it is undergoing a transformation, becoming more complex than ever before, with rapidly evolving technologies, declining costs, and shifting regulatory landscapes. Three trends in particular are converging to produce game-changing disruptions: electrification, decentralization, and digitization. They encompass all of the major technologies such as distributed storage, distributed generation, smart meters, smart appliances, electric vehicles, which are impacting the electricity system. So talk about all these. We have our first speaker, Mr. S.K. Soni. Mr. Soni has first-hand 4 decades of experience of power system operations of various regional grids of India, and has worked extensively towards integration of state grids to form regional grids and subsequent formation of the national grid and now SARC grid. He specializes in power system operation, planning, commercial settlement, restoration, an entire gamut of power pooling and governance. Other areas of interest include electricity market, open access, regulatory affairs, besides expertise in load dispatch technology, integration of renewable energy, etc. Shri S.K. Soni is a Fellow of Institution of Engineers, Fellow of IEEE, Distinguished Alumnus of IIT Kharagpur, Distinguished Member SIGRE, and represented India on the SIGRE Study Committee on Power System Operation, and he currently represents India on the SIGRE Study Committee on Electricity Market and Regulations. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. S.K. Soni on the dais. Next speaker, we have Dr. Rahul Tongia. Rahul Tongia is a fellow with Brookings India in New Delhi. His work focuses on technology and policy, especially for sustainable development. He leads the Energy and Sustainability Group at Brookings India and also is active in broader issues of technology. His work spans the entire gamut of electricity with focuses on supply options including renewable energy, smart grids, which use innovative information and communications technology to improve management of the electricity utility grid, issues of access and quality, and broader issues of reforms and regulation, including electricity pricing. He is also an adjunct professor at Carnegie Mellon University, United States, and was the founding technical advisor for the Government of India's Smart Grid Task Force. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Rahul Tongia. Professor Sukumar. Next speaker, we have Professor Sukumar Mishra. He is a professor in the Department of Electrical Engineering at IIT Delhi. His interest lies in the field of power systems, power quality studies, and renewable energy. He has published over 100 research articles which have been published in international journals, conferences, etc. He is currently holding the position of Vice Chair of Intelligent System Subcommittee of Power and Energy Society of IEEE. He is a recipient of the INSA Medal for Young Scientist, the INAE Young Engineer Award, and the INAE Silver Jubilee Young Engineer Award. He is a Fellow of IET UK, NASI India, INA India, IETE India, and IE India. He is actively involved in academic and industrial collaboration for research and development. He is working as the NTPC Chair Professor and was previously worked as the Power Grid Chair Professor. He is also serving as an independent director of the Cross Border Power Transmission Company and the River Engineering Private Limited. He has handled many research projects and industrial consultancies. He has a vast experience of 25 years and is currently serving as the editor for the IEEE transactions on smart grid and an associate editor of the IET Generation, Transmission and Distribution Journal. So please welcome Professor Sukumar Mishra on the dais. To moderate the session, we have Mr. Vikram Gandotra, Chairman, Smart Grid Division. Mr. Rahul Walwalkar from Indian Energy Storage Alliance. He came here, but he had some emergency because of which he had to leave. So we'll be continuing with 3 speakers. So to moderate the session, we have Mr. Vikram Gandotra, he Chairman, Smart Grid Division. So Vikram, I'd request you to keep track of the time. So we have 1 hour and 15 minutes for this session. Okay. Okay.
Do we have a mic here or
We can.
we'll use this.
Or I think it will be a bit cumbersome, right? We can.
Okay. Thank you, Purnendu. Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody can hear me right at the end. Yeah, good. Okay, so on behalf of Rahul, first I would like to just excuse because he had come and he had a very emergency. He had to rush back, but he has promised he'll come back in after some time and continue. Will be available later in the day. So it's really an honor for me to be on this dais with you know, the stalwarts, I would say, who you you would never get anybody who are purer in their abilities and capabilities as far as their fields are concerned. Suni sir, I've had pleasure to work with you for a very long time, and it's a real honor just to, you know, exchange anything with you. Everything which comes out, I just value that like gold. And Rahul, of course, we were together when we were setting up the ISGF and the task force, and Professor also, we have had you know, chances to work along with academia. So just to start this discussion, I would like to start with Suni sir. Sir, with your experience and so much talk which we see today in terms of you know, changing on the generation side from large generation to smaller generation, changes on the consumption side with electric vehicles and DC. What would you say that there is a very, you know, question which doomsdayers are always saying that the end of the large power installation, whether it is generation or transmission, those days are over. Sir, your expert comments on this.
First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. It's a rare opportunity to interact with the you know, manufacturers and those who bring us load in the power system from the bottom. Normally we see from the top. So thank you very much. Question of Mr. Vikram Gandotra about doomsday. Let me lighter vein say that whenever some counsel or a lawyer pleads before the honorable judge that something will collapse and gates will, then they simply answer, don't tell me doomsday, and set it aside. So this theory is just not acceptable. It's there in fiction. As far as the grid is concerned, I would say that it will morph itself. We keep listening that microgrids are coming and people will leave the grid. let me give an example of real life, move away from the technology side. So for example, I have become completely self-sufficient. I'm running it economical. So is Mr. Vikram Gandotra, so is Mr. Rahul Tungia and Dr. Sukumar Mishra. Still, we would like to meet once in a while. Who doesn't want to live in a society? And what is this association doing? Everybody can run, but still you need an association. So basically, grid is a manifestation of society. You certainly need society, and even if you have become sufficient, you have become rich, you need society more because you would love to give something to society. So I don't see at all that people will go out of the grid. In fact, they will like to be more and more connected, more and more remain in the grid. And connectivity is something which in all walks of life, in my opinion, is increasing. We want more rail connectivity, road connectivity, air and communication. We want to get connected. Even in social media, I never thought that I will get so much connected. So we are getting connected. So I'm fairly confident that grid will exist. It will morph itself. It may not supply you energy, but it will supply you satisfaction. It will act as an insurance to you. Maybe you will pay for that. And I have not seen any rich person, however rich he may be, has not taken insurance. The richest person also would like to take insurance. So that's how I'll sum up my very clumsy thoughts on this such a complicated topic.
Thank you, sir. We'll come back to you. In the meantime, I'll also like to provoke Rahul's views. Rahul, you have seen the situation both in the US as well as in India, how it is emerging. And you also have seen the India's utilities also struggling in the discoms and looking forward to a future which the expectations are very high. So could you throw some light on what should the future look like for utilities and how the community, manufacturers community here should look at the future requirements which are coming from utilities, both in, say, transmission side or more in distribution, because you have worked closer with the distribution utilities. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to second Soniji's view that people will in fact increase their interactions with each other, because at an ultimate smart system, people talk of prosumers, producer-consumer. So if I put up a rooftop panel, solar, and hypothetically we're talking about residences, in the middle of the day, your consumption in your own house may not be sufficient, and you either need to store it, which adds battery costs, or you will feed it into the grid, making the grid become your battery. So I don't think at any stretch people envisage in the foreseeable future the end of the wires business. Now what there can be is changes in business models. For example, carriage and content separation is being talked about. Those are different than the physical asset side that may have more and more pockets of small generation as well, but we're also not going to necessarily end these large sorts of units. I have some notes. I promise you these are not cricket scores. I don't think there's a match today. People talk about the death of coal and the rise of renewables. A few points are in order. Other than solar, all renewables and even most of solar in India is large grid scale as of now. Second, even coal, which people say is dying, is very costly, is actually not so costly at the pit head. It becomes costly when you get away from the pit head because we have the highest transportation costs in the world for coal. And we have some studies at Brookings and sort of clarifying why and how. These are policy choices. It's not right or wrong, but every time you switch on your lights and you're getting coal-based power far from the pit head, you are paying for passenger rail. 31+% of what you pay for railways for coal is paying for passengers. That's a big deal, big amount of money. So what can happen is, now notice two things. You have two different worlds possibly emerging. One is high RE, which is going to come in RE-rich regions, which are coastal, western, typically. Wind especially is location dependent. Even solar is slightly better in some areas than in other areas. Second, you've got coal, which is also going to grow in domestic pithead areas more than areas where it's expensive, which means far away. In either case, when you get concentration of generation assets, you will need transmission. That's the sort of stepping back view that comes to light. That in a 5-10 year horizon, we're going to be increasing the transmission requirements. You look at all the studies of 2030, 2040, worldwide, US, India, they're saying you're going to need a lot more transmission to handle this. Storage notwithstanding, that's a little bit of a gray horse, but it's not as easy as people think that when the prices fall enough. Now, if you talk distribution side, that's actually where a lot more of your challenges are going to be, where, for several reasons. The prosumer is just one of them. When you feed into the grid, people talk about, but also other changes. So, for example, you may see the rise of what we've called storage as a service, like software as a service. Why should I put up my battery at my house? Why should a tech park or a business owner put it up? Third parties can provide this storage because you only need a little bit of storage to provide reliability for a wider area. Similarly, how many of you you've all seen, in fact, government's ambitions to have only electric vehicles sold by 2030 in terms of passengers, and a lot of public transport as well, like intra-city buses at the very least. That's a remarkable change. Now, I'm not going to do a straw poll thinking how many people think we're going to achieve it. But let's assume we do. What are the implications for the grid? There are two scenarios. Extreme ends I want to lay out as bounding exercise, thought exercises. One is everybody plugs in at the same time. Worst case scenario. You come home evening, Wednesday, Friday evening, everybody plugs in at the end of the day, which is the evening peak of the grid. The GW demand on the grid will be enormous and unmanageable. The other extreme is the entire duty cycle of the vehicles is converted into spread out through either pricing mechanisms, time of day, control mechanisms, some combination, doesn't matter how. And we spread out this charge required to do your X kilometers per vehicle per week. The ratio between these two extremes is more than 35:1. That's enormous. So what it tells you is there's a lot of uncertainty onto what the demand impact will be. And most importantly, what is foreseen is your local distributional impacts will be very non-linear, non-trivial. Because if you think of where will electric vehicles be bought, assuming they are pricey or a slight premium, they're going to be bought in so-called richer neighborhoods, apartment complexes. My own apartment complex, I live in Bengaluru, 912 parking spots. Some people came to the committee. I was on the committee handling engineering and technology issues of the Residents Association. They said, convert it to an EV charging. We said, fine, you have to pay the incremental cost because it wasn't designed for this. Now we did some calculations saying, what if everybody wants to plug in an EV, 912? Well, at what charging rate? Is it a slow charge, trickle charge, so-called fast charge, supercharge? You could have a kW impact varying from a couple of kW up to 50 kW to 100 kW, depending on the technology. Let's assume it's just a very simple, boring 5 kW charging solution. Even 5 kW at 100 consumers out of 900 simultaneously charging, which is not unreasonable, is 500 kilowatts instantaneous, and continuous increased demand, which neither your transformers nor your feeders are set up to handle. So there's going to be a lot of churn, change, and learning and evolution of this space. So just because we're getting distributed and smarter with batteries, demand response, smart metering, smart grid, it doesn't mean the wires or the infrastructure need is going to go away.
Before I move on to Professor Suni Saab, so we believe now the grid is going to be there. It needs to be stronger it probably will be seeing many more pressures than what it is being seen today. Uh, Sir, uh, how far, or let's say July 2012, we had a situation in our grid which, God forbid, it should never repeat again. How, what do you think is the probability today, or maybe after 5 years, uh, the way these demands are coming onto the grid, the way our grid operators, they have learned lessons, they have invested a lot of money in technology, in new lines, new substations, strengthening the grid. So, in your opinion, sir, do you see that that we have no probability or very less probability of such a instance getting repeated on the grid?
Touch wood, the table is of wood. Uh, we should not have 2012 repetition. All actions are being taken. And whenever I address my younger colleagues, I tell them that never forget that there was a 2012. Always remind yourself of that. Coming to straight to the topics which you have raised. First of all, probability is zero of sun shining is also not zero. That's what the probability theory has taught me. That I'm just telling you on the theoretical front that that's also not zero. So nobody can say that nothing would happen. We run Titanic movie number of times to the younger engineers to show them that people said that we have built an unsinkable Titanic. So Titanics can sink. The issue is how much corrective actions you take, how much you value reliability, or you take it for granted. What really happens is these black swan event, low probability, high impact events have to be literally simulated and mitigations have to be done all the time. For example, if a substation is going totally dark, which happens almost every week in this part of the world, that's not acceptable. And finally, such non-compliances, what this call, and when all the holes of the cheese get aligned, that the bullet goes through. And all the cheese have holes. So how strong is your defense mechanism? How strong is your compliance mechanism? Are some people being booked for not following certain rules? That will give you confidence whether there will be a large disturbance or not. The interesting thing about this is that once a thing happens, public memory is very short. People will forget gradually. And then complacency sets in, and gradually these things pile up, and something of that kind happens. It happens in all walks of life. We don't put on belt in the car. We don't put on helmet. We don't follow the gap between the two cars, and finally someday some accident occurs. So grid is also nothing but like this. All what I would say is that compliance mechanism, booking the defaulter with a very heavy hand has to be a continuous process. And we should not take pride that, oh, such a thing happened, still nothing happened to the grid. Our grid is so strong. And that's a sure prescription for a larger disaster. So I would always say that complexity is increasing, the size has become big, you will not have small disturbances. But if you have a large disturbance, you would have a very big disturbance. So no room for saying that nothing would happen. At every stage, people have to keep working on it. Now we have a large size units, 1,000 megawatt. What happens if it goes off? What happens if there is an earthquake and the whole corridor shakes? And we have something called credible contingencies in our power system parlance. We simulate the system for credible contingencies. What is credible? Credible is believable. What is believable? What is not believable in some parts of the world is believable here. So you have to look into that. People will drive without any gap, and the car would have, you can make out that there are marks on the car that they don't drive with the margins. So I would say that a lot needs to be done on the grid, and 5 years gone, maybe another 5 will go. People will go off who have seen the war. People will think that there is no war. It doesn't mean that you stop spending on defense and keep yourself ready. So being a grid operator, and I can talk on and this, and we prepare every day for such a scenario. And there have to be a battalion of engineers who have to think of this, keep booking, and bring them to books. And the fact that for last couple of years nobody has been fined for non-compliance worries me a lot. That the regulator is not doing or the system operator is not booking. Some people are not working properly, they should be fined. That only will ensure that nothing of that kind.